are live.
Yeah.
We're live. Good evening, council, members of the senior leadership team, and of course, the residents of the town of Pelham. I see we have quorum, so I will call to order this public meeting under the Planning Act. I will ask council, after looking at the agenda, is there any comments or changes to be made to the agenda? Seeing none, we have a motion from Councilor Trophy that the agenda for the October 22nd, 2019 public meeting under the Planning Act, special meeting of Committee of the Whole, be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And after looking at the agenda, I must ask all members of council, does anyone have a pecuniary interest in general nature or thereof to declare? Seeing none, I ask the clerk to please note that. So now I have a declaration perhaps to read, and then we will get down to business. The Planning Act requires under Section 22 and Section 3412 that council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of the proposed amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw. This public meeting, has been called to satisfy these requirements. Notice of this meeting was provided through publication in the Voice of Pelham on October 2nd, 2019. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. There is an attendance list on the table, which we would ask all present to print their name and complete mailing address if they wish to be notified of the decision on the amendments by council. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the town of Pelham to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Pelham before the bylaws are passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. In addition to the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, staff have also prepared a draft licensing bylaw for feedback as well. In closing, we stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments or the draft licensing bylaw, and therefore any comments received will be taken into consideration. Okay, so Planning Act application. So those are my remarks. So now we have an information report from the Director of Planning, Ms. Barbara Weens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council and the public. Thank you for coming out tonight. I always feel good when we've got a full house. It makes me feel good, and hopefully we'll get some positive feedback and input on this proposal. So this is a public meeting with respect to short-term rental accommodations. And the purpose of this meeting is to provide information to you, council, and to the public, and to receive feedback on this proposed concept. We'll be providing a summary of the proposed changes, and also there'll be an opportunity for public comment and feedback and input. So how did we get here? So in terms of the process, back in September of 2018, Council directed staff to undertake a consultation process that would inform policy and regulatory changes for the town, excuse me, on short-term accommodations. Between November 2018 and April 2019, staff did reach out to a number of different stakeholders and conducted one-on-one meetings. This included meetings with residents, with business associations, with operators of short-term accommodations, and we also conducted research on other municipalities and in terms of kind of best practices and or policies and standards that are used elsewhere. On October 1st, we also held a roundtable meeting with various stakeholder groups, and again, this included representatives from resident associations, stakeholders, bylaw enforcement staff, and planning staff. And that at that meeting, we presented these draft official plan and zoning bylaw and licensing policies, and we had some really good dialogue and discussion between the various groups. It was very informative. And so this evening we're here to also provide the opportunity for council input on these proposals, and as well as to receive public input. Following tonight's public meeting, and based on the input that we received, there very well could be changes made to the proposed official plan, zoning bylaw, and licensing bylaws before they are recommended back to council for approval. So the draft framework for short-term accommodations that we are proposing include a draft official plan amendment, a draft zoning bylaw amendment, and draft licensing bylaw. I do note that currently in the town we do not have a licensing bylaw, so this would be one of the first opportunities to get into that foray of licensing. So with respect to the official plan amendment, the town's official plan currently does permit bed and breakfast establishments in single detached residential dwellings within the urban living area. And the urban living area is the urban area of Font Hill and Fenwick. The draft proposes to expand this to include all dwelling types and with respect to meeting specific policy requirements. The policies include being located within a principal residence of the owner or operator, preserving the character of the dwelling as a private residence, and being able to accommodate parking and access on the site. Again, with respect to the draft official plan amendment, the staff are proposing to differentiate between a bed and breakfast establishment and a short-term accommodation. A bed and breakfast establishment is something that is conducted within a dwelling, but it's occupied by an owner and an operator, and it's where they will be renting out rooms, bedrooms to guests. They may also offer meals, and typically it's a breakfast that is offered, and hence the name a bed and breakfast establishment. Whereas a short-term rental accommodation would be renting the entire dwelling unit, and it's not necessarily owner-occupied. So the current official plan does not address short-term accommodation at all. It only deals with bed and breakfasts. And so we're looking at changes to permit short-term accommodation. That would be the renting out of an entire dwelling unit, and looking at allowing that in the downtown and the downtown transitional areas. So it would not be within the residential areas for short-term accommodation. Also, there's some confusion in the official plan, and we want to provide clarity. So we're looking at providing an amendment to the official plan to provide clarity with respect to the residential areas of Northwest Fonthill and the East Fonthill secondary plan that would permit bed and breakfast establishments in dwellings within those areas. The current official plan allows them in the urban living area. Those East Fonthill secondary plan area and the Northwest Fonthill secondary plan are within the urban living area, but there is some confusion as to whether or not the specific policies do apply to that area, so we want to provide clarity. Further changes that are proposed with respect to the official plan. The current official plan does permit, again, bed and breakfast establishments within the agricultural area, that being the good general agricultural and the specialty agricultural, as well as the environmental protection 2 designations. So we're going to continue to allow that, but we're going to propose to expand that to also include short-term accommodations. And then with respect to that, in these agricultural areas, the good general and the specialty and the environmental protection areas, we're looking at some policy adjustments just to cover off the addition of short-term accommodation in there, and to clarify that bed and breakfast will be secondary to the primary use of the dwelling, and that in these rural areas, the maximum number of bedrooms would be limited to 3. And then again, there will be slight policy adjustments to make it clear that some of these differentiation between a short-term accommodation and a bed and breakfast. The zoning bylaw, currently the zoning bylaw does not address either bed and breakfast or short-term accommodation, so it is silent, so we have to prepare amendments to the zoning bylaw to deal with both of those types of uses. So we're proposing to add a definition for a bed and breakfast. And this bed and breakfast establishment means a principal residence dwelling of the owner or operator in which the owner or operator provides no more than 3 guest rooms for the temporary accommodation of the traveling public for 28 days or less, and may offer meals to the registered guests, but it does not include a hotel, motel, group home, restaurant, or any other use that's otherwise defined or classified. And then we are also proposing to add a definition for principal residence dwelling, which would mean a dwelling unit owned or rented by a person alone or jointly with another person, which is their principal place of residency. Again, this is to get at the fact that we want the bed and breakfast type of uses, that they're going to be owner and operator living in the dwelling. With respect to short-term accommodation, again, this is not defined in the zoning bylaw currently, so we're adding a proposal to define this. And short-term accommodation would mean a dwelling or a dwelling unit that is rented or available for rent with the intention of financial compensation for an occupancy period of less than 28 consecutive days, and includes a bed and breakfast, but does not include a motel, hotel, or other accommodation where no payment is exchanged for use. Other changes to the proposed zoning bylaw, again, because the bylaw is silent on it, we want to provide for some specific provisions with respect to these, and in particular to address things like parking requirements. For a bed and breakfast, we're proposing 1 parking space for each guest room, in addition to the required parking for the dwelling of the principal residence. Oh, I'm sorry. That there would be the ability for signage, but the signage be restricted in size to only 4 square feet, and it would need to meet the requirements of the Ontario Building Code and Fire Code, and also have the requirement to obtain a license from the town. With respect to, again, short-term accommodations, these would be permitted in the agricultural, rural, and neighborhood commercial, general commercial, and rural commercial zones. Again, subject to meeting licensing requirements. And the draft licensing bylaw is a new tool that we are proposing, and it will be required for all types of short-term accommodation, including bed and breakfasts. And the requirement is that they obtain a license annually, and there would be a fee for that. The bylaw would provide that they need to submit information to the town with respect to site plan and floor plans, so that we know which rooms are being rented out for a bed and breakfast. They need to be inspected by the fire department and by law enforcement staff. The proposal is that they would be inspected every 2 years for short-term accommodation and 4 years for a bed and breakfast establishment. The licensing bylaw would also require the owners of a short-term accommodation to appoint a representative who can be on the site within 60 minutes if the town receives a complaint or some kind of event happens and there's some type of safety or nuisance issue that needs to be addressed. The licensing bylaw would also require that there's information posted within the short-term accommodation use unit that nuisances are to be avoided, and these nuisances relate to noise and parking issues, and that their bylaw would also establish a process for enforcement, penalties, and appeals. So to date, we've received some comments. Some of those council has received and in the package. There was a comment received from Jim Mirando, and he's in agreement with the proposal. There was a letter submitted on behalf of Pat Kohler, by Pat Kohler on behalf of the concerned Pelham residents, indicating that they do not wish to have bed and breakfast or any short-term accommodations being allowed in residential areas. Larry Strogan also submitted a letter, and he does not agree with allowing short-term rentals in residential areas, and expressed some concerns regarding experiences that he's had with a short-term rental across the street from him. Georgia Major expressed concern regarding how the current bed and breakfast operations would be addressed and feels that they should not be allowed in residential areas. And also felt that property maintenance needs to be addressed. Signage should comply with bylaws, and that there should be no signage in residential areas, and that parking needs to be addressed. Scott Strike also submitted a letter and does not wish to have short-term accommodation rentals allowed in residential areas, and also expressed concern with respect to safety for children. The region of Niagara provided comments and indicated that the proposal is supported by the provincial policy statement, as it is contributing to the completion of complete communities. They do recognize that short-term accommodations are an agritourism use that would be permitted as an on-farm diversified use, and they suggest that some of our definitions should be better aligned with the definitions used by the province, and that we should include the provincial criteria in the official plan amendment to ensure that the OPA aligns with provincial policies as it relates to agritourism type uses. And then, as I indicated earlier, we did have a roundtable meeting on October 1st, where there was also a good exchange of ideas and comments that were received. In particular, there were some comments expressed that bed and breakfast should only be owner and not an operator. So that was one comment that we received, and there was a lot of questions around kind of the enforcement provisions and those kind of things, and certainly bylaw enforcement indicated that with the licensing bylaw and through these tools and the zoning bylaw and the official plan amendment, that there would be better enforcement capabilities. So in summary, This presentation was provided to provide information on the proposed policy and regulatory changes relating to short-term accommodations. It's provided for your information, and we're seeking public input as well as input from council on these proposals. We note that the drafts may change based on the comments that we received, and town staff are not making any recommendations to you this evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Director of Planning. Does committee members have any questions for the director on the presentation? Mike Trophy.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. At the beginning of the presentation, had a list of, you sat down and had a list, roundtable and discussions, one-on-one discussions and roundtable guests. Will we be provided some of that information?
So yes, that
Who
information.
attended these things and then the information that was gathered?
So Appendix A to our report includes a summary of all the comments that we've heard. We can certainly provide you the list of who we met with and talked to, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Wink.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director, can you define what the downtown and downtown transitional areas are? For example, in Fenwick, it seems to be a mixed bag where you could have an R1 zoning and right beside it a commercial and then an R1. So where exactly are the downtown areas and the transitional areas?
So the downtown areas are those areas that are identified in our official plan as the downtown, and in Fonthill and in Fenwick, and that includes the core area of Fenwick only and the core area of Fonthill. So I can certainly provide you mapping with that so you can see what the limits of that area is. And then the transitional area, the downtown transitional area, is an area that's identified in our official plan as well, and it includes the area on Station Street from Highway 20 south to Summersides Boulevard.
Thank you.
Councilor Hahn.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just curious in regards to other municipalities. So of the other 443 municipalities, have we gone out to any of them to find out what's worked, what hasn't worked, the pros, the cons? Have we done some research
Yes.
out there? Yes?
Yes, we
So-
certainly have looked at what other municipalities are doing. Here in the Niagara area, we looked at what Niagara on the Lake is doing, Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, Fort Erie. We've looked at what the town of Blue Mountains has done. We've looked at some other areas across Canada as well, in terms of what some of the municipalities in British Columbia are doing. We've also looked at the City of Toronto, for example. They had instituted some policies last summer that they passed, and they were appealed to the board. So we're also waiting the outcome of that board decision. That hearing just concluded a week and a half ago.
Councilor Corr.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. How many short-term rentals are in our community now? Do we know how many short-term rentals are in our
Based on my
community?
review of the various rental sites that exist out there, and so that's Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, home away, one key. I believe we have somewhere in the order of 20.
Now, would it, through you, Mr. Mayor, what trouble would we say we do not want short-term rentals in residential area? Would that be a difficult to have in our new plan? Zero tolerance.
That is certainly something that council can consider.
And the only time we would have short-term rentals would be in the downtown core or in the commercial areas.
What about the rural agricultural area?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. But we could vote today, if we all agreed, that we could all say that we don't want any short-term rentals in single dwelling areas in
Certainly
our
staff is
community.
looking for guidance from
Okay.
council on this, and that is certainly, something that we're looking for guidance on. We do have, certainly some short-term accommodations, bed and breakfasts primarily, in residential areas that are currently operating, and, some of them have been operating very successfully for some years.
I did have Mike first. Councillor Trophy.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. When we're talking about the licensing, would that be grandfathered into existing bed and breakfasts that are currently operating, or in the 20 that you feel that are operating right now?
If council were to pass a licensing bylaw, then all businesses, but short-term accommodations would be required to be licensed, existing ones and new ones.
Okay, and then the second part of the question, if they require a license, I'm sure there'll be a fee for that license, and that would be used for bylaw enforcement, because we can put bylaws in place, but if we don't enforce them.
Licensing fees are an administrative fee to cover the cost of administering the licensing. They're not a fee to cover necessarily bylaw enforcement, other than bylaw enforcement time to do the inspections and so forth, to make sure that the unit does comply with the zoning requirements and building code requirements and fire code requirements. So there's a licensing fee, and it can't be a punitive amount, it has to be a reasonable amount. And then within the licensing bylaw, there's a proposal for, schedule of fines if you would be operating contrary to the license.
Yeah, my concern with that would be, we put in this bylaws, but right now, currently, if somebody complains, we send somebody out there. But I want to make sure that we have the resources and the manpower to enforce the bylaws.
Councillor Hahn.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, how many B&Bs do we know that are currently in existence, so traditional B&Bs in Pelham right now, the way it stands? Do we have that number? Like,
Traditional ones that are owner occupied,
yeah,
I'd say about half of the short-term accommodations are bed and breakfasts that are owner occupied.
and so what is half right now? What, like, can you give me a
Well-
number?
And
I previously indicated we have about 20,
20, okay.
based on my review of the sites,
So half are traditional B&Bs?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, how confident are you in that 20 number? Because I know from the area, the ward that I'm responsible for, that number seems really low.
Well, I just know from what is posted on these websites. So if people are renting them through some other means that are not a rental platform, then we don't know about that. But when I look at Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, Monkey, and there's a number of them, and you put in the town of Pelham or Fonthill, and
Right.
there's a number that come up, and when I count them, that's what I get to.
Councillor Corr.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the chief, right now, our buy officers do not work on the weekends, am I correct? And because I do get a lot of emails saying that there's a short-term rental, it's 11 o'clock. We have nobody sent out there to tell the renters that they need to, be quiet. I think in the last email I got is someone said you need to phone the police. Am I right on that? So,
That's right, Mr. Yeah, that's correct. We don't have bylaw officers that work on nights or over the weekends or through late at night. But when it comes to, it's just not only any rental place, it's any noise complaint, regardless. It's if bylaw's not working, then your second option or your other option is the police, to call the police, and they'll enforce it.
and a couple more questions to you, Mr. Mayor. So if we decided that we have zero short-term rentals in residential, what happens to the 20 existing short-term rentals? We give them a 30-day notice, 60 notice to close down?
That would be something we'd have to work through. I can't answer that right now.
One question, you had a round table with the with a group, how much of an impact or how much of input do they have with your presentation?
We presented the draft official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, and the licensing bylaw, and there was quite a robust discussion. We had representatives from resident associations, and we had operators, and we had bylaw enforcement staff and planning staff. So there was quite a diverse conversation and dialogue, and everybody participated in it.
And one other question, did we look at Niagara Falls? I understand the Niagara Falls short-term rental is very, they're there to protect the hotels. And I understand Niagara Lake is a little bit more relaxed, but Niagara Falls is very stringent on short-term rentals. Am I right saying that?
Yes, we have looked at what Niagara Falls has done, and they have permitted it in their tourist commercial area. And
Not in the residential.
they are attempting to limit it in the residential, and they've had limited success with that.
Limited success?
And it's,
Well, it's gotta be policed, like everything else.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So Stuart?
Hey, through you, Mr. Mayor, the bed and breakfast where they serve food, do those fall under the Public Health Act?
yes, public health is part of the inspection process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes,
Yeah,
Councilor.
through you, Mr. Mayor. The bed and breakfast and the short-term rental, there's a discrepancy there. I can say that I have a short-term rental, I have a home, and I'm currently using it for short-term rental. But then I can also say, it's a bed and breakfast. Like, how do you prove?
So bed and breakfast, it has to be your principal residence. You have to live there.
Right. So let's say there's a few college students invested in a home, they can say that's their principal residence. And they can be living with somebody else and having that, like there's a little bit of gray area there, I think.
Well, are college students renting this through the college year, like through the semester?
Yeah, they could be. I know there's
It's not a short-term accommodation. Short-term accommodation is you're renting it for less than a month, less than 28 days. If you're renting it for more than 28 days, you fall under a rental, you fall under the Landlord-Tenant Act and those requirements, so. If you're renting a house to students, you're not a short-term accommodation.
No, I'm saying if I was, let's say I had some extra money and I invested into a home, and I'm saying that's my principal residence, but I can rent it out on a Airbnb. I'm just using, like, you're saying the principal residence. I can call that my principal residence, but I'm not living there.
So if you're not living there, then you're a short-term accommodation.
Yeah, then I can say I'm using it as a bed and breakfast. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's say I bought a place in Lookout, and I want to rent it out, and short-term rentals are not allowed there.
Allowed.
So then I can say, no, it's a bed and breakfast.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to,
And then you'd have to prove that you're living there, so we would need documented proof that is your primary residence.
okay. Yeah, I understand that, but it's easy to prove, and I'm not living there. It would be. I think we need to define it. Airbnb and bed and breakfast.
Airbnb is a online rental platform, so.
Correct.
Airbnb is not a land use, a bed and breakfast is a land use. So when we use the term Airbnb, just want to make clear that that's not.
No, sure,
That
yes.
can be anything, right?
Yep.
And it's an online rental platform.
Councilor Shore?
Yes, in your proposal, when we look at short-term or bed and breakfast, are these rooms in the basement? Are they in the second floor? Are they allowed to be in the basement? Because if they're in the basement, then we're looking at fire issues and escape routes and window sizes.
Yeah, so they would have to meet building code and fire code requirements if they are in the basement. That's why they're required to be inspected. and they're required to provide us with the floor plan of where those rooms are, and that's part of the licensing.
So you're saying they could be in the basement?
They could be, but
If they're,
if they meet
meet the standards?
Yes.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, what would the standards be, Chief, if you had a room, renting a room in the basement?
Through Mr. Mayor, can't give you all the specifics without getting into the code, but I mean, you have to have, you know, second means of egress and ingress, has to be separated. You have to have a certain size opening to be able to get in and out, so it could be a window, but it can only be 900 mil maximum off the floor. There's a bunch of size and, you know, travel distances. There's a whole number of things that they have to meet. So, yeah, these could potentially exist in a basement, but it would be subject to an inspection, and we'd have a checklist, and they'd have to meet all those checks. If they don't, then they don't get approval.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, would there be firewalls in between these rooms?
They have to be separated, so
What I'm getting at is if it's on the second floor with, you know, in certain townhomes, they would always have firewalls. Would these rooms be fire?
the levels have to be separated, so the ceiling of the basement or the floor of the first floor would have to have a certain fire rating separation, including doorways or whatever, that would impede the progress of smoke and fire to a certain period in time, measured in time.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Any other questions? So I think I've got at least one question here. I think a lot of concern the people I've talked to is it's one thing to pass a bylaw, and it's the other thing to enforce it. Now I know that this council in the upcoming budget process, we are being asked to hire another bylaw officer, I believe. So that'll be a decision we have to make, so that we will perhaps then have bylaw control, not only during the week, but during the weekend. I guess it's one thing to put this in a bylaw, and it's even one thing to go knock on a door, and I don't know if we have right to enter to do the checks. I think the concern I'm getting from a lot of people is that once you let this out into the neighborhood, is the enforcing of it. It just seems to be, and I can understand that in this day and age of, just whatever. It's just, how do you get in there to make sure that I realize that you do have inspections there, that every 2 years we can go in, and if it's a primary residence, we can go in every 4 years. But I guess even if it's just, especially the short-term rentals, it just seems to be, looks like it's going to be, if you allow them in, it seems like there's a possibility there to be an enforcement nightmare. In your recent, and I know you've done a lot of time on this, you and staff, did you, when you're talking to other municipalities, did you ask them about that kind of a problem? Were they able to enforce what they put in writing?
Yeah, certainly we've had quite a bit of conversations with other municipalities on the enforcement, and I know bylaw enforcement staff have had discussions with other municipalities. There's various things that you can do. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everything is going to be, sunshine and roses here.
Yes.
But once you start enforcement and you start doing it, you get compliance, and that's the goal of enforcement. And when these operators start to realize that you're out there doing enforcement regularly and consistently, and you're treating people reasonably and fairly in your enforcement process, you start not to have the problems.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. Councilor Court?
Yes, I have two more questions, and that'll be it. So could you give me a definition of a single dwelling community? What's the definition of that?
A single detached dwelling?
Community.
community?
Yeah. Is there, in the bylaws, do we have a definition of what a single dwelling community or area? Because
don't.
if we pass this, we can't really call ourselves a single dwelling community anymore. Because we just open it wide for anybody to purchase a home, to short-term rentals. Am I right? Because I wouldn't want this beside me or in my home.
So we don't define a single detached community, and certainly I wouldn't call Pelham a single detached community. We have a variety of types of housing forms and built forms, single, semis, apartments, so.
Sorry to interrupt you. So then we would have to change where our zone, our R1s and R2s are, if we're gonna accept this.
Our R1 zone permits a single detached dwelling.
Yeah.
An R2 zone permits a single detached dwelling, and then an R3 zone permits a triplex, duplex, townhouse unit, those types of things. So we have those zone categories now. I guess I'm not clear on your question.
What I'm saying is, so when a person, a real estate person wants to sell a home in our community, he has to declare now that when you buy that single dwelling home, you're gonna have a bed Airbnb there or a short-term rental living beside you. Would they have to declare that now?
So they typically come to the town and ask what the zoning is and what is permitted. And if your zoning permits a bed and breakfast, then that may be permitted, but not every home will operate a bed and breakfast.
I understand that, but we can't, in fairness, they have to declare that now. So if I bought a home in Fawn Hill today at 29 Weimar, the real estate person or someone's gonna have to tell me that that's not a residential, that's a short-term rental home, and the other one beside me is a bed and breakfast. Would they have to tell me that now?
Quite frankly, I don't know if they have to tell you that. I'm not a real estate agent.
Okay,
But they do confirm what the zoning of your property is, so they, when they're selling you something, they know what is allowed.
But isn't it our responsibility to tell those people what they're getting into? Those are my thoughts, that's all. Because if someone didn't tell me that, and I bought a home in Fawn Hill, knowing that these two,
Yeah, so, I mean, this happens regularly, but as staff, we don't know when a property is put up for sale and when it's not. The real estate agents and homeowners don't come to us and say, I'm selling my property.
but we owe it to the people that buy homes here,
And the
to
people
tell
that
them.
are buying a home,
If we
if
accept this. Okay.
if the people that are buying a home, when they come and sell or buy a home, they go to the lawyer and the lawyer will ask them, do you want to buy title insurance or do you want to do a compliance letter? And it's just with respect to the property that they're buying.
No, I
Not
understand.
with respect
This-
to the adjacent lands.
No.
That's they need to do that. That's their due diligence.
And one other question, and I will stop. Taxes. Are these people, if we approve this, are these people paying more taxes because they're earning income?
So typically in
And will there be a development charge? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Typically in other municipalities where you do permit this, their MPAC does apply a surcharge to the residential dwelling, and it's a percentage to adjust for the fact that it is an income generating property.
So on an average, if I'm paying $6,000, how much would they pay if I convert my home at $6,000? If I convert my home to a short-term rental, how much more would that be? Or we don't know?
It's difficult to answer that exactly as a hypothetical, but this town charges 1.80 as its commercial rate relative to the value of a residential property, so all things being equal, 80% more on the portion that might be assessed as commercial, which would be a a component thereof.
Any other comments?
Just, I think it would behoove all of us to understand that regardless of decisions aren't to be made tonight, right, that's actually not why we're here, but when you do come to that point, whether council elects to go with the penultimate sanction, which is complete banning of everything, to allowing everything to something in between, the enforcement issue is the same regardless of whether you ban them or allow them everywhere, because it's inspections of businesses or it's inspections to see that there isn't a business. But in either event, the short-term rental as a cultural phenomenon has now been with us for several years. It is alive, present, and healthy here in the town of Pelham. And we will have an enforcement issue. If you ban, it still requires enforcement. And if you regulate and license, it requires enforcement. And if you're anywhere in there just is no outcome here that doesn't require more enforcement. And there's a shameless plug for a staff proposal that you'll think about it. But in all seriousness, either requires enforcement to prove that it is or isn't there, or to prove that it's safe. But there is no such thing as a universe without increased enforcement next year, regardless of the nature of the decision you make. So that should not be what influences whatever decision council chooses to arrive at.
But through you, Mr. Mayor, to answer that, wouldn't the residents know if it's a bed and breakfast? They know. I tell you, there's a car on my street. I know there's something, he's not there. So no disrespect. I'm just saying that the residents will police their own neighborhoods or their own.
Residents also know if their neighbors speed.
Yes,
Or
yes.
ingesting
So,
illicit narcotics. That doesn't lead to convictions in court.
no, I understand.
Only enforcement will do that. So that, I'm just trying to help us focus on the salient points to get to whatever the right policy decision is.
Yes, Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think the residents understand the inspection requirement, because if we truly have the proper regulatory inspection requirement with all the zoning requirements, I'm guessing that, I'm not saying half the homes in town, but a bit large percentage of homes in town have homes that have had renovations done, and once you get to code inspection, that's going to be very onerous for most of these people. So if those people realize how tough the regulatory inspection requirement would be, I think that might be a deterrent from a lot of people for applying for these kind of licenses. Because I know what people have done. And I know from an engineering standpoint what's required for fire separation and zoning and all this kind of stuff. And most of the older homes, I would hope they have to bring them up to the latest code. Because if you put them up to the latest code, I would think that that would be almost an impossible situation for homes to agree with.
And that's a requirement, and there's certainly is cost associated with that.
Any other questions from council? Okay, not seeing any. Again, I thank Ms. Weens for her report. We have a resolution passed by Councillor Stewart. That committee receive report number 0094 for information as it pertains to the proposed short-term accommodations, policies, and regulations, and recommend that committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report regarding the short-term accommodations, policies, and regulations. Any more comments, questions on this? Not seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Recommendation carries. Thank you. So now the next part of the meeting is open to members of the public who have indicated that they wanted to speak tonight. So I read this?
You can call each member up to see if they wish to speak.
Okay. So I'll just make sure everyone is here that's on our list. Just call out your name and please indicate if you still wish to speak to this gathering. So Corey Ziraldo? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Jim Mirando?
Jim's away, he's in Delaware.
Oh, thank you for that, Counselor. Okay, Pat Kohler on behalf of concerned Pelham residents? Yes. Thank you. We found out that Larry Stojan isn't here tonight, I believe. Okay.
He has, Al Toner.
Oh, I'm sorry, but Al Toner is here to speak. Okay, thank you. Yep, okay. And Ron and Judy Riva, are they here? No. Okay. And then, I'm sorry, let me put my glasses on here, kind of loud. Blair Means and Rose Craig, are those people here? Okay.
And Scott Strike
Oh, and Scott Strike
and Jim and Sandy.
and Jim and Sandy Stokes.
If they'd like to come in that order, if you want to call up Corey
No.
to speak.
Okay, so we'll start off, and I'll call out these names again. I guess we just wanted to see how many people are here. So first, oh, I'm sorry,
4.2.5 was missed. Just
go back.
Apollo and Joanne.
Email, that was email. Have the email
4.2.5.
correspondence. It's in your package.
Madam Clerk, help me out here. 4.2 Apollo. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, were they going to speak?
No, it's an email.
No,
that
it's
I
just
sent. It's
yeah,
in the package,
yeah. So it's in. So that is just information.
It's for
Okay, no problem.
information,
Yeah.
it is on the resolution.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So first up then will be Corey Ziraldo. Please state your name and away we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors, town staff, CAO, and residents. My name is Corey Ziraldo. I'm a resident in the Lookout subdivision. I'm also one of the members of the Lookout Residents Group, the original group of 3 families that started that group. The hope of that group was actually to try to get the community together in a new subdivision to improve its standing as a community, help develop the parks that we were waiting for, and inform each other. And it's been very successful. We've found lost dogs. We've taken care of raccoons that have had challenges. We've alerted each other when vehicles were being looked through. And it is a wonderful community to live in within the larger community of Fawn Hill and Pelham. I'm here tonight because one of the topics that originally came up from the 3 families that started the group was the challenge with what's affectionately known as Airbnbs. Although Airbnb is ultimately nothing more than a booking site, other ones similar to that, those sites fill vacant rooms in homes, for lack of a better word. Whether it's someone who operates a bed and breakfast, or it's somebody who operates a home as a commercial enterprise in order to just generate funds. The only thing that separates someone from running a home with multiple rooms and putting them on and calling it a traditional bed and breakfast potentially is a stale muffin in a juice box. That's the difference between adding a breakfast to it. Obviously a minimal cost when we talk about this. With regards to proposals that we've seen here, I think it's important to point out that we are definitely in support of the commercial core and rural agricultural areas for these establishments. We are also in support of greater funding for our bylaw enforcement department. And not just for this issue, but obviously a number of issues that many residents experience. It is a responsive department. We'd like to see in many cases it become proactive as well. And that, of course, as the CAO kindly presented, has greater costs and carries a need with it. And certainly support our fire chief who's in charge there in that venture. One of the challenges we have with regards to the size of properties is that the larger the property on the smaller the piece of land, the more sought after it is. The Northwest Secondary Plan, which is the Lookout subdivision, has exactly that. It generates a great ROI It is much nicer than someone having a 1970s backsplit in order to turn this around to operate this type of facility. So they're target areas, those types of homes in the lookout area. Currently, that plan does not include bed and breakfast establishments specifically written into it, although the urban plan that surrounds it does. This amendment would now allow this to occur in that secondary plan. When we bought our homes, we looked at that plan, and that was one of the items that underscored why we purchased there. Knowing that specifically that was not going to be allowed in that area. We found otherwise after we moved in. I was also advised by one property owner in the Lookout subdivision who is operating one of these establishments that prior to purchasing the home for their venture, they checked with the town and were advised it was okay to operate their bed and breakfast there. Now again, this is what that person has advised me. I wasn't there for that conversation, but as you can imagine, it was shocking to me when I'd done my own research prior to purchase the house myself. This contradicts obviously the secondary plan. In contrast, friends of mine who were running a residential B&B that is in a more agricultural, listed as an agricultural area, approximately 5 years ago, 6 years ago from the town, received a cease and desist order. Really difficult to comprehend where those align. Over 3 months they then did what they required to do, and the town advised that they would allow them to operate it as such after a little bit of work on their part, but as good neighbors they ceased and desisted for 3 months. We've heard about licensing, and that licensing is the solution to solving the problems, because with a license you can then penalize that person. Similar to obviously a driver's license. If you're driving too fast, you're going to get a ticket, and you can expect that. But just like driving a car, people out there drive without a license. As a matter of fact, statistics specifically on the high end say that on average 40% actually get a license when it comes to Airbnb and those types of establishments. And specifically a town in British Columbia is paying approximately $18,000 a year to get $21,000 in lost licensing fees to a company whose sole purpose is to go online and identify where those properties are that are operating these types of facilities. So if you don't get a license, then what? If we restrict it from residential areas and someone operates one, then it is the same situation as someone who refuses to get a license. Very similar to what the CAO mentioned. If we allow it everywhere, or we don't allow it at all, as the two far ends of the spectrum, we're in the same situation. So whether there's a license there or there isn't, we still have to deal with the ones that don't get a license. So if we restrict it from residential areas, I believe we have more clout to go after that, because it eliminates that problem from that area, and the town sends the message that they want to support their commercial and rural areas. Certainly opening up to the residential areas turns those residential areas, or our community, and it has the potential to become a commercial community. The economics hurt the commercial core. Significant costs related to operating a business, which are removed in residential areas, making residential areas with small land and large homes the preference over opening and in. You don't have to pay your business taxes. You don't have to pay, per se, your higher insurance for your commercial insurance. You're not building specific ramps and door entryways to make them accessible. The residential areas certainly don't make accessible homes unless it's specifically built for someone who has a disability. So do we really penalize those people in those commercial areas? They're paying a much higher cost to operate a business, following all the rules, while they're being undercut by, in our subdivision, one property that was renting for $43 a night. It probably costs more than that just to clean the sheets in our commercial area. The commercial core is also walking distance to shops and restaurants. Residential areas are sleeping accommodations for people who are touring outside of Pelham. If I get in my car to drive down to Niagara Falls, which we heard some of the operators say that that's really the destination people are looking for, then they're enjoying those areas. and then coming back to sleep here. Someone who parks their car at an inn in the downtown core is more apt to walk to a restaurant, walk to a shop. But opening up licensing to the residential areas undermines that ability for them to operate their business and drives them into those residential areas where they've got a greater ROI with less red tape, significantly less red tape. Limiting licenses. During our focus group, one of the operators actually got very excited about that proposition. And the reason they got excited was they exclaimed that they've struggled over the last 3 years having to operate their property because they found it's kind of been ebbing and flowing and going down with business. So friends of mine who ran a traditional B&B have actually closed their B&B due to the cheaper residential properties that are listed on Airbnb. They found that the economics in the area haven't actually supported it. So how can a company who's operating in the commercial core or somewhere like Hipwell's compete with these properties? They won't get the income that's required to help reinvest into their properties in order to have them as one of the anchors in our community. We talked about whether the owner was present, and I heard some comments from councillors. In the proposal, it spoke to specifically that I could purchase the house next door to me, and as long as I wrote a letter saying that someone was residing there and that individual was there as their primary residence, perhaps my wife, we have good days and bad days as all do, I could operate that property. There are loopholes and opportunities, and we experience them on a nightly basis where we live. Other traditional tourist areas, such as Blue Mountain, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, have restricted residential areas. They've focused on ensuring that the traditional community is maintained and that traditional neighborhood, the feel and the vibe of knowing who your neighbor is night after night. If properties are long-term rentals, you get to know the person that's there. If there's 2 generations of a family in that home, you get to know the person that's there. Your children get to know them. We have a new neighbor every night. We will become a target for individuals hoping to operate these properties in residential areas as well. If the communities around us have restricted them, and we choose not to restrict them in our residential areas, then people will see that as an economic opportunity and look to take advantage of that at our expense. However, it is correct that not every house will become a bed and breakfast, be it run through VRBO or Airbnb, but you can't stop the house next door to you from becoming it one day. And that's the fear that residents have. The lack of control for who lives next door to them. You can never control who lives next door. I've had bad neighbors. You can't avoid that. But you can manage them, and you can deal with them on different levels. But when your neighbor is having a party, and you ask them to stop and they laugh at you because the next day they're gone, that might be one night for that individual, but it's every weekend for the neighbor. Because next week it's a new individual who has that experience for their first time, but it's your 50th, 75th, 100th time. It's your summer weekends. Prior to this starting, we'd reached out as a group looking for assistance from the town, only to find out the town and the council of the day were interested in allowing it everywhere. We were surprised and felt that we weren't supported. And subsequently, a series of meetings, information sessions. Mayor Junkin was capable of attending one of those. One of those sessions where residents, specifically in the Lookout neighborhood or the northwest secondary plan, had the opportunity to speak and demonstrate their experiences. And I thought at the time that that might be coming to a closure. That was over a year ago now, to this issue. It certainly didn't come to a closure. Residents have become more disenfranchised. They feel it's becoming more and more a hopeless battle in order to restrict these properties in our community from turning into these Airbnb bed and breakfast type establishments. I can't speak to their experiences. I'll say a couple of them tonight. Certainly Mayor Junkin has had the opportunity to see it from the horse's mouth, if you will. But I've had my children woken up at night on occasions with people ringing the doorbell because they got the wrong house. Standing there with luggage in hand and their cell phone as I have to navigate them on where to go. In the evenings, every night after putting our children to bed, my wife goes and looks out the front window to see who our newest neighbors from and read the license plate in their car. One of our neighbors chose to try to work with the property owner, and they are nice people. I want to underscore that. We're not talking about bad people in the community. They're people that are operating a facility because they've been allowed to. And I don't fault them for that. But they tried to work with them in order to erect a fence because two of the properties this person was operating bordered two of their fence lines. They agreed to build the fence, and on the day the posts were being dug, they went up to that neighbor to work on collecting funds, and the neighbor who operated these two properties changed their mind that day. And the entire cost was then put on the individual who was trying to mitigate people walking between these properties across their backyard that were brought in by this neighbor operating these two facilities. One of those facilities is now a long-term rental, and although that has changed, it doesn't change the next houses from becoming that. One of our neighbors had, on a couple occasions, people walk right into their house because, unlike me, their front door wasn't locked. And they greeted them down the main hallway with luggage in hand. They installed a security system as a result because they felt so insecure in their home. Is that an expense of a happy neighborhood? It's not. We've had party houses with people at midnight racing their cars up and down the street, walking across people's backyards. These aren't potential or possible experiences that we'd have. These are real. These are the experiences we've had. I can't speak to what we will have or the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario certainly is that you could have a pedophile register wherever they're going to live, but can rent an Airbnb in my community for $43 a night to watch the neighborhood. We have 23 children on our street of 21 houses, all under 13. That's a worst case scenario. Is it fear-mongering? No, but I go to bed sleeping thinking about that. Should I? Should that keep me up? During our one-on-one sessions that we appreciated the planning department giving us the opportunity to speak to, I presented a petition that I'd started in our Lookout neighborhood, which is approximately 200 and some houses. The petition held approximately a little over, I believe, 200 names on it from our subdivision. Others, seeing the petition that I'd started there, generated a number of other petitions, and they'd forward those to me, seeing me as someone who seemed to be at the lead of this. In total, over 800 names in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks were collected. For the town of Pelham, that percentage of our overall residents is significant. And the ask that petition, and I have for you today, is not to allow bed and breakfast establishments in residential areas of Pelham And certainly, from the Lookout neighborhood's perspective, maintaining the current secondary plan, which does not allow them in the Northwest secondary plan known as the Lookout subdivision. I certainly want to thank you all for your time. This has been a very long process. It has been agonizing and taken us all away from our families for over a year. So I leave it with you to take the information you receive and make the best possible choice you believe is for this community. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Aldo, thank you for your presentation. It's probably too late for me to say this now, as anytime anyone makes a presentation to council, we do usually try to limit it to 10 minutes, but whatever. Okay, next speaker is Jim Mirando. I'm sorry, was he not here? Oh, he's not here. Okay, so then Pat Kohler on behalf of concerned Pelham residents. And thank you for taking the time to appear before us.
Thank you. Mayor Junkin, council members, town employees, and the residents of Pelham. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening on behalf of our group, CPR, Concerned Pelham Residents. Our group was formed last summer prior to the November election to poll candidates and the community about our concerns regarding, at that time, Airbnbs and short-term rentals. More aptly called, in some communities today in Ontario, tourist rentals. And we were also helping the people of Pelham see what each candidate felt about this topic. So with our concerns gathered through a great deal of research, as well as through personal experiences, for well over a year now, we presented this information to the planning department last November, and we appreciated having the opportunity to do that. Out of that meeting, we found out on October the 1st, when we met with them again, that there would be no short-term rentals in residential areas, that short-term rentals, that term, would only be allowed in rural and commercial areas. But they now changed the popular term that we're familiar with, Airbnbs or vacation rentals, to bed and breakfast. Now, bed and breakfast, according to what we were told, can only be rooms that you rent. So it would not be a kitchen or a living room area and a bedroom, as some Airbnbs are set up. It would only be that you are allowed to rent out a bedroom. And that they were going to be allowing them in all residential areas of Pelham, no matter what type of home you had. So, over the past decade, several decades, Fonthill has been known as a very residential community. And that's one of the reasons why my husband and I moved here over 42 years ago. It was a great escape from city life. There was only one traffic light, and there were no big businesses. Well, that's changed. In other cities across North America, from our research, these rentals have added to an increase of traffic, parking, garbage, and crime in residential neighborhoods, including an increase in the number of people in your front yards and in your backyards. So I have my trusty sidekick here, Bob, who has informed me that he's missing a Bruins and Leaf game. So I'm very thankful for his help this evening. So we currently live in a townhome development. I'm sorry, everyone may not be able to see this. So the ends are neighbors, and Pat and Bob are in the middle there. And you see the number of people that each reside in the townhomes. And you see each car that they currently have. So if we were to blow this to the extreme, and each of our neighbors got a license for a bed and breakfast, this is what could happen. Since each room is allowed one car, rental room, and 2 people can be in a rental room, that's what could happen to our neighborhood. And that's only in our block of 4 townhomes. I'm not sure why they've come up with a number of 3 rooms. There are several communities in Ontario that only allow 2 rooms. All homeowners, have a right to expect that the residential neighborhood in which they made a large financial investment not be commercialized in any way. We are a town, not a city. There are plenty of areas, as you've heard from Corey, where tourists can find accommodations. And even hotels in major cities in Canada have found a 10 to 13% drop in their revenue related to the short-term rentals and Airbnbs out there. These tourist rentals should be treated as a hotel industry, equality and fairness to all. But cities and towns are not quite able to do this. If we wanted to live in a tourist community, we would have moved to Niagara-on-the-Lake, Niagara Falls, or even Stratford. I like Stratford. Also, there seems to be no dire need for the people that we talk with to have bed and breakfast in residential areas. There's absolutely no need to disrupt our residential neighborhoods. In particular, the mere transient nature of bread and breakfast, whether their owners are there or not, is unsettling to neighbors, particularly where there are seniors involved. Now, they seem to think that if they say that it's owner-occupied, all will be well. But we found in our neighborhood where there is an Airbnb, people pull up to our homes and ask where the rental is. Doorbells are rung. Strangers are walking around on our properties. Motion sensor spotlights go on and off at any time of the night to light up our yards. And sometimes they don't shut off. And renters have even argued with some of the neighbors in our subdivision. We find that there are different people around our neighborhood on a weekly basis. Calls to bylaw do not work because there's no legal manner right now to address any of the concerns in our neighborhood. And you may have read a recent article in the Toronto Star this weekend about the city of Burlington and how one large home there has been used, a short-term rental, as a banquet site. And the city's hands are tied right now because there are no bylaws in place to protect the neighbors in that community from that happening. Even with the current planning department's organization of bed and breakfast, future calls to bylaw will also not work because at our October the 1st meeting with fire and bylaw officers, we were told that they're not allowed to enter any home. Even if the planned licensing for bed and breakfast is extremely weak, no one inspects to see that the rental is compliant. They're not able, from what we were told at that meeting, they're not able to go there with the checklist to make sure that all these things are done. The checklist is brought by the homeowner to the town clerk, who then decides if that place gets a license or not. And honestly, why should we, the neighbors to bed and breakfast, have to go through all that, especially with the idea of a contact number? I don't know if you have an alarm system in your house and you must supply contacts for that. That system does not always work. And the frustration of trying to contact someone with the town on a weekend or an evening just gains more anger. And for goodness sakes, you can't call the police on issues that you might deal with that. The police have enough on their plate. Whether the owners are there or not, we didn't purchase a home to enjoy a hotel business run next door. In fact, the planning department is getting around the point, owner-operated, and also allowing renters of a home to have a bed and breakfast. Renters of any kind do not have a stake in the value of our homes, not like the current owners in a residential community. Imagine your surprise should you purchase a home and find out there's a B&B next door to you when you move in. One of the things I've noticed in our neighborhood is that discourse arises because residents now bear the responsibility of initiating complaints to the town, or even more upsetting, not complaining and keeping all of those concerns with yourself. So they're frustrated by the fact that little or nothing will be done about their complaint. It becomes a neighbor pitted against neighbor, a situation in which none of us like to live in. And fear is another factor, and Corey mentioned that having strangers in your neighborhood can be very stressful. Renters can also do damage. If you've ever lived next door to a home that is rented, and we have, so far we've spent over $800 in damage that renters have done to our property, and it's very difficult to recoup that. B&B owners are there for themselves. They may vet potential guests, but neighbors around them have no idea who is there or what they are up to. They're there to make money at our expense and our privacy. As far as bringing lots of money into the town, Corey has already talked about that, so I'll skip that section. If you can get a cheap room for $49 a night, which is happening in our neighborhood, by the way, earlier in the year, this room was over $80 a night. That's a great deal, but there are no tourist attractions in Fonthill or Pelham. It's a beautiful area to live in. We love it here. But they're going to take their money to the wineries, to Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake. There's also a new creative business out there, which we've heard about. It's called Bud and Breakfast, which is popping up. It involves cannabis tours, and B&Bs are combined with them. Think about that one. Licensing money that we might collect for the small number of homes that might be involved just doesn't add up to what would cost the town of Pelham. And the city of Penticton, I don't know if that's what Corey was talking about, has had to hire someone for $30,000 to find owners of unlicensed short-term rentals and bed and breakfast, showing that whether you're licensed or not, you're still going to have issues. And I know that the town of Fort Erie last year estimated a cost of creating and enforcing a cottage rental program, and I know they're still working on all of this, that it would cost them at least $30,000 a year compared to bringing in a total of $17,000 in revenue. In my closing, the use of townhouse rent, residential, low-density residential, EF low-density residential that was up on the board here are all confusing to persons not familiar with these terms. But the planning department seems to make it that bed and breakfasts are going to be in all of them. So why is the demand there? I feel that council needs to review these carefully, in particular the types of dwellings, semis, townhomes, single homes, apartments. And by the way, some apartments in our town do not have strata or boards, so how do you prevent them from being in apartments? I'm asking that council take a really good look at what amendments are being made to zoning and what the planning department is going to allow in our residential areas. No matter how many rules you set in place, people always break them. Keep it simple. We have no objection to short-term rentals, as that expression is used, in commercial areas or rural areas. But keep bed and breakfast out of residential areas. The planning department has thrown everything out there, perhaps for us to just see it all. I don't know why. But there are no restrictions, as other cities in Ontario have, on lot widths, no restrictions on lot size, no restrictions on the number of licenses, no realistic expectations of license fee or years that one can have one. no expectations regarding infractions and how a license can be revoked, and no clear picture to the general public in Pelham clearly in what an STR is compared to a B&B and where they can be. Many municipalities in Ontario have very specific provisions laid out to address these. There's an appendix available on the internet for several of these cities and all that they have to offer on this topic. For instance, the city of Markham, which stood out for me, has no B&Bs in residential areas. In speaking with Pelham residents, they really want to know how you feel you can make all residential areas commercial business areas. We also see no grandfathering of current businesses like this. Gives them a short time to wrap up their business. And maybe even use that term, tourist homes. Oh, we didn't purchase our home to live in a commercial area with different strangers every week. Neighborhoods where mostly seniors reside is not what they bought into. Peace, quiet, and familiar faces. For B&B owners who need extra income and who want to experience meeting worldly travelers, it does not compare to the inconvenience caused by you and your guests to your neighbors. We do not believe the profit motives of bed and breakfast owners should be allowed to negatively affect our home's value, our peace and quiet, our safety and security. Preserving the character and quality of life in our neighborhoods is our priority. Bed and breakfast add absolutely no benefit to a residential area in our town. The only benefit is to the person collecting the money. Thank you.
Your presentation. The next presenter is would have been Larry, but in speaking on his behalf is a Mr. Al Toner. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to come out and address us tonight.
Yes, my name is Al Toner. I live in Fenwick, and I'm presenting this submission on behalf of Larry Stogren, who couldn't be here this evening. Larry lives at 683 Canberra Road in Fenwick. So, good evening, Mr. Mayor, town councilors, town staff, and the residents of Pelham. I am present here at this meeting to rebut the following proposals contained in the draft official plan amendment we are discussing here tonight. Firstly, I disagree with allowing short-term rental uses in certain residential designations within the town of Pelham. I disagree with this because most residential designations within the town are zoned either letter R, followed by a numeral like 1 or 2, etc. The R1 designates residential and includes the words in quotations, one single-family detached dwelling on one lot and uses buildings and structures accessories thereto, end quote. Fenwick, for example, is zoned RV-1, meaning residential village 1. The town's definition of this zoning designation is a one family per household residential area. Residents can expect to experience the, quote, enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof except by due process of law, end quote. This is contained in the Canadian Bill of Rights, which is still in effect, even though the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not contain anything clear about property rights for Canadians. There should be no short-term rentals allowed in any R-1 or RV-1 or similarly single-family residential zoned areas, as it leads to the town taking away our property rights and opening up a possible flood of rental units all over the town's residential areas by residents eager to make money to the possible detriment of neighboring homes, families, and property values. Allowing short-term rentals in exclusive residential zoned areas of the town of Pelham could remove the ability for neighbors close to these rentals to enjoy their properties due to the various factors that will not be effectively controlled. Residents in a residential area purchased or built their homes for just that use, residential. They did not purchase their property to include a proliferation of rental units, illegal rooming houses, commercialism, transient traders, and visitors whom residents have no recourse to should problems arise. Furthermore, who here wants to live beside or across from a residence with signage indicating that it is an Airbnb or likewise signage? watch your property value drop and prospective residential purchasers run should you want to sell your property located close to such a transient rental unit. As far as the town bylaw goes, requiring the rental residence to, quote, be occupied as a principal residence by the owner-operator, end quote, and adhere to other regulations, this is nonsense. How does the town propose to verify or to police this? The wording of this requirement is way too vague and with absolutely no teeth to the requirement. There is absolutely nothing to prohibit an owner of a residence to live away from that residence for long extended time periods, or not to live in the residence at all for that matter, returning only briefly to do the wash or to clean the house, then leave again. I believe just such a thing is happening on my street. The bylaw process and bylaw administration of this town is vastly flawed and requires immediate revamping to actively and effectively apply the bylaws which this town has created. A town can be sued for not enforcing its own bylaws. The City of Toronto was sued by a resident there for just that. Reliance on a complaint-driven bylaw system is archaic, not viable, nor reliable, especially if you have a neighbor who has something against you and uses the Town of Pelham bylaws to torment you. I can attest to this personally, and when I was vigorously pursued by the previous mayor of this town and a certain past councillor when I had broken no laws or bylaws yet. My complaints about alleged illegal rooming houses in the immediate area of my home, both verbal and written, I submitted, were ignored for years, and to this date, in fact, I'm holding several pages of these unanswered written complaints here right now in my hand, and yet these clear bylaw infractions, which affect my property value, have been left to operate. As I stated, the bylaw process in this town needs to change. Serious infractions within the town presently exist, with some of them costing the town serious amounts of tax money. Money that this town desperately needs. It is unfair for residents to subsidize these operations, illegal where they are located, paying no taxes, and not being tended to by the bylaw department of this town. Who is to say that the bylaw department will do any better concerning short-term rentals? My personal experience with a rental unit directly across the street from me, located at 1151 Sunset Drive, at the corner of Sunset and Campbell Road, has not been good. The owner of this rental residence does not occupy this dwelling on a regular basis and does not police how it is used by his clients. Rather, the owner is there occasionally and comes and goes, actually living away from his home on Sunset Drive in Fenwick for most of the time. Because his home is directly across from mine, I know when he is home and not, and he is away for extended periods. His rental rules state a maximum of 4 adults to occupy this premise, yet many more in excess of that actually do occupy it regularly and possibly even without his knowledge. I have observed 6 adults and 5 children staying in this place, which is a very small home that was originally built many years ago for 2 people. My security cameras have captured persons coming from the residence, picking pears from my small 9-tree orchard located on my property, just off Sunset Drive and across from the rental. No pears for us to can this year. Also, my cameras, along with myself, have observed the 1 a.m. late arrivals of guests who choose to wander over to beside my rear detached garage and laneway and urinate on my grass. I spared bringing you the photos of the 3 men who did that. There have been instances where I put out no garbage, yet I have returned unexpectedly back home to find bags beside my laneway. I have observed hypodermic needles and foreign drug-looking garbage spilling out onto the ground from these bags. I certainly do not want my residents to be associated with this type of questionable material. A quick check of my security system shows the exact date, time, and who deposited that garbage beside my laneway after I had left for the day. The culprit came from the rental unit. It appears that the rental had excess garbage bags that possibly the owner did not want to pay garbage bag tags for. Visitors to the rental clients, as well as their clients themselves of the rental unit, have used my personal laneways to park in without my permission and have blocked up the side of Sunset Drive, thereby making it difficult for traffic to navigate the road, which is already abnormally narrow. The rental has been rented to transient traders who are using the garage to conduct business, assemble products, and work from for weeks, clearly against the town home occupations bylaws, which prohibit a home-based business from using the garage portion of the home. Some of these transits appeared to be independent contractors working for Bell, that'd be Bell Canada, as observed by the decals affixed to their vehicles. In checking my security cameras, I have observed persons from the rental trespassing upon my property other than when pilfering my pear orchard. This has necessitated me having to install more security equipment and lighting. I do not know who these rental clients are, nor where they come from, other than what is on their license plates, which I have taken to photographing for my own security. I have not had any personal problems or words with any clients who rented this home. However, the other problems and observations I have had has caused a definite and major impact in the once enjoyable home and property I have had for over 30 years. It has caused certain uneasiness to me when I am away from my home. I have no objection to these rentals being allowed in other areas indicated in the proposed amendment, as there is less possibility of impacting neighboring properties in the agricultural areas and commercial areas of the town, as that is where these rentals should be located, just not in the single-family residential zones and neighborhoods of this town. This concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, councilors, and town staff, and residents of Pelham.
Thank you, Mr. Toner, for your presentation. Next on the list, I forget if they were here or not, so I'll just call the name. Polio.
No.
Pardon? They're not here?
No.
Okay, then we'll go down. Thank you. Ron and Judy Viva.
No,
No? Okay.
those are the emails.
Oh, those are emails. Okay. And Blair and Mins and Rose Craig, are they here? No. And Scott Strike. Oh. And Jim and Sandy Stokes. Okay.
So we can open it up to the public if
Yeah,
anybody wishes.
so, this is the part of the meeting that if you haven't given us advance notice to speak, but if you have changed your mind and you want to address council, now is the time that anyone present can indeed come forward to the microphone and make a presentation or statement. I'm sorry?
Maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Mine will be short.
Okay.
Your name and your name, please, sir?
Joe Robbie, 14 Norton Boulevard. Not used to getting up and talking in front of people. Please forgive me if my voice gets a little. Very moved by everybody and everybody's what people have said. We moved here because we were told it was a single-family resident. My wife and I are in constant conversation with each other, saying, should we stay here? Does the town want us here? My wife shops loyally at all the shops in town. But everywhere, cars are parked on streets, bylaws are broken, what is done? Do you want a couple of 76-year-old people here? Should we move?
Thank you. Yeah.
Carol Jones. Two questions. If Airbnbs are empty for a certain amount of time, would they qualify for a vacancy rebate?
Aren't we wrapping those up?
I'm sorry, Ed, that perhaps the director of planning could answer that.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I'm not able to answer that. That's a question for corporate services. You have to be, property has to be vacant for a certain length of time in order to get that. I don't know what that length of time is.
Okay.
So that would mean our taxpayer money, our taxes would be paying for this vacancy, correct?
It has to be vacant for a certain
Yeah.
length of time,
So
a
if
number
I-
of months, so if it's not rented out for a number of
So
months.
if I opened one up, didn't rent it,
Just did.
I could apply for it?
I can't remember.
Again, if it's a residential unit, they would be paying its taxes, and like any other unit that's vacant, they can apply for a vacant rebate. But I don't know what that length of time is. I can't answer that question.
Would you find that out and address the council with that? Not today, I'm not
Certainly.
saying. Okay, and one other comment, and I'm not even sure if I'm correct on this one. Insurance is only good for the day you present it with your permit. The person could go out and cancel it on that day. Would the town then be liable for a person getting injured, a place burning down, causing damage to another house? Not sure about that question. If it's,
No.
would the town be liable if they if they canceled their insurance?
Town municipal liability tends to reflect, not that I'm here to provide legal advice this evening, but municipal liability tends to attract to actions conducted either on town property or the actions of town staff. Those are the two ways we attract liability. Your hypothetical here involves private property and a lack of insurance thereon, neither of which are specifically municipal issues. So, broadly speaking, one would think not.
Okay.
I definitely did not think I was going to be speaking, and I hate public speaking, so.
No problem. Oh, your name, please.
My name is Lindy. Thank you for hearing me out. I am one of the 20 of the short-term accommodations in Pelham. I am also a paramedic in the region. I purchased 23 acres in 2012. At that time, I was not disclosed that all of the land around me was going to be developed by large homes on 1-acre lots, but it is what it is. I have been operating as a short-term accommodation for 6 years. I have had guests from all over the world, Australia, England, Ireland, all over the U.S., and it's we are set back. So it's been a great experience. I've had no trouble. My neighbors are aware of the situation, and there's never been any difficulties. When I travel, I prefer short-term rentals or accommodations. India, Hawaii, you name it, I prefer it. I've done a B&B in Johannesburg. I think there is a place for it. And I guess why I came up today, because it's not what's coming down the line for licensing for short-term accommodations in agricultural areas and commercial. I absolutely agree and will adhere to whatever licensing comes down. But when I was at the roundtable meeting, there was an elderly couple that was renting or operating a bed and breakfast. And I don't see them here, and I just kind of wanted to speak up for them, because what is the situation where they have been running a B&B? It's been a good source of income for them. They've had no problems. They've created no trouble, and they've been doing it as they've retired, and it's a source of income from them. So, is there going to be some grandfathering for these people that haven't been a problem? Because, let's face it, when you go to a bed and breakfast, you're going to sleep, have breakfast, and leave. You get to talk to the person that's renting to you, the host, for a little bit, and you go. I'm not going to someone else's house to live with them and party. I think we are really painting all the situations with the worst brush that we possibly can. I think there's a lot of benefits to this. Pelham is growing. The population is going to rise. It's just growing. The downtown is not what it used to be. And I think it's a good source of income for certain folks, and if it's run properly. I don't know. I just think that we just put such a bad hex on these B&Bs in residential areas. I grew up in a village of 350 people. I understand what community is, and I think it can be done well, and I just would like to speak for the people that have been doing it well, and that you might come down hard on them. Yeah, sorry, I'm just rambling because I was not expecting to say anything, but yeah. And when it comes to licensing, I know that we are drawing from other places to get ideas of what licensing fees should be. And my input would be, I don't think that we should be the same fees that Niagara Lake is. Pelham is not the tourist destination that Niagara Lake is. And I think it would be unfair to have the same fees when there's only 20 of us, and monitoring us is not going to be the same same that it is in Niagara Lake, where they're saturated. But, okay.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, sir. And please state your name for the clerk.
My name is Chuck Miller.
Okay.
I live at 7 Baker Place, just south of Pancake.
Thank you.
The reason I'm here is Baker Place is a 7-house cul-de-sac. I've been there 20 years, and we have an active Airbnb on our cul-de-sac. It is a house that has been converted to 2 units, at least it looks that way from the outside, and it is quite active in terms of rentals. Mostly weekends. The owner is not on site and has not been. Owner, I think that's really important in this discussion. I'm going to preface what I talk about here, which is all grandfathering, Mr. Mayor, including some questions of Planner Weens for clarification, which I think are going to be of value for council in the long run. My late dad, who was a many-year and decade municipal councillor in Niagara, used to say his biggest frustration with municipal planners like me, I'm a retired municipal planner, is that planning policies land on council's desks usually after the cows have left the barn. That's why I want to talk about grandfathering tonight. The Appendix D, which is the last pages of your report tonight, is the active section on grandfathering as I understand it. I should preface this by saying I did not participate in any of the previous works with the planning department at all. Frankly, Mr. Mayor and Council, I've been trying to avoid all things municipal since I retired. And you can understand why. But I did read the staff report. So Appendix D deals with grandfathering. And in short, if I understand it correctly, it says an existing Airbnb in a residential zone and which would not be permitted under the new OPN zoning must apply by a certain date in 2020 for permit. And if I understand it correctly, Mr. Mayor, must be in existence when your new OPN zoning bylaw are approved. At least that's what I think it says. Now, that raises a bunch of issues about grandfathering. And it leads to 4 questions, which, through you, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, if I can do so, I'd like to ask Barb. Okay? Now, during her presentation, Barb said that the current zoning bylaw, again, if I understand what she said correctly, she said the current bylaw is silent on the issue of short-term accommodations. Now, as an extension of that, does staff, does the municipality have an opinion at the staff level, or have they received legal opinion on whether an existing Airbnb, like I just described in my neighborhood, is permitted or prohibited by the current zoning bylaw? So that's my first question.
Director of Planning, Ms. Weens, would you like?
Mr. Mayor, through you, we have had certainly discussions with legal counsel regarding this issue. The bylaw is silent with respect to it, and given the fact that it is silent on bed and breakfasts and short-term accommodations, the indication is that if we were to allow them and provide for them, that existing ones are grandfathered under zoning. They're not grandfathered under licensing.
Okay. So if I may ask the question, and no, I don't, that's not my spot. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure I understood the answer, so I'm going to ask. Then, Barb, you're saying that, in your opinion, an existing Airbnb in, I guess, an R1 zone or residential zone is permitted because of the silence of the current zoning bylaw?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, that's the first question, Mr. Mayor. My second question, I think, then is answered by itself, because I was going to ask whether that interpretation has been tested here by your bylaw enforcement officers to the courts or otherwise, and the answer is obviously no.
No, it has not been tested.
Which leads to my third question. What's the theory of planning staff in this case to propose formalizing grandfathering as of the date of a new bylaw? Why are you doing that formally here? That's what Appendix D seems to do. If you're interpreting that it's a permitted use anyway, why are we doing that in Appendix D? Is the question.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think we're just doing that just to provide clarity. That would be the answer. Again, licensing is, the Appendix D is the licensing bylaw. And under licensing, you don't have the ability to be grandfathered. Once the licensing bylaw is in place, you're required to comply with it.
Understood. Understood. Mr. Mayor, my point in this is, if there is any doubt of whether the 20 or so, I'm interested in one of them, to be honest. If there's any doubt on whether they're permitted under the existing zoning bylaw, then I have some concerns about Appendix D specifically outlining how they could become, in planning terms, a legal non-conforming use. In other words, that would then eliminate, I think, backtracking to attempt to close down current ones if interpretation was made by somebody, your bylaw enforcement, that it's not a permitted use. Following my train of thought here?
No, because if I can clarify, perhaps.
Yep.
So we have lots of non-conforming
Everywhere,
uses.
everywhere. They preceded the zoning bylaw.
Yeah,
Understood.
yes. So you're saying, so we pass a bylaw, then these, let's say B&Bs, that were not classified before, because we didn't have a bylaw to do that, they will now move into the non, I keep forgetting that word, non-conforming status. I mean, is that not a usual step?
That only works if they're legal non-conforming under the present bylaw, and we heard what Barb said was a staff interpretation of that, so I'm not going to pursue it any further.
Okay.
But it still raises in my mind the question of why Appendix D. Perhaps we'll discuss that further.
Okay.
My fourth question is, you've got a combination of zoning regs and reg regs that would apply, I guess, for a grandfathered Airbnb. I didn't follow it too closely, but the key one in my mind is owner occupancy. It's a key issue here. Would that be grandfathered in if my neighbor comes in and applies for legalization of their Airbnb under your new rules? Would they be required to be an owner occupant? That's a key issue.
Mr. Mayor, through you, so in the licensing bylaw, the definition of a bed and breakfast means the principal residence dwelling in which the owner or operator provides guest rooms for the temporary accommodation of 28 consecutive days or less to the traveling public and so forth. So it is to be their principal residence. So under the licensing bylaw, they are required to comply with that.
So then, Mr. Mayor, for clarity, and the question was asked earlier, if an existing, and I use the term Airbnb, I rather should talking about short-term accommodation. If an existing Airbnb comes under your new rules, and they're not living there, it's the case in my neighborhood, in order to get permitted, they would then have to be, that'd be their primary residence, I guess is the definition. You're saying that would have to be their primary residence for them to get licensed.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those are questions.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Again, please state your name for the clerk.
Yes. My name is Mike Jones. I live at 44 Emmett, and I'm currently with a problem with my neighbor's residence. We are a single-family dwelling area. We have been since the conception of Emmett Street. Actually, it was Emmett Avenue when we first moved there. But anyways, we have a problem now of trying to get bylaws upheld for a single-family dwelling in that 42 Emmett. Having a hard time trying to get the bylaw officer out there to conduct another. He's been there once, he's been there twice. What's happened to the house is it's been changed. It's been changed from a single family into a duplex without coming and changing the zoning. Now, I say that, and I may be mistaken, because now what I hear tonight is he could now turn the upstairs or turn one of the areas into his home or his son's home, and then turn the basement or the bottom level into a bed and breakfast. And if he does this prior to the zoning changes, that would be acceptable because he'd be grandfathered in. And I'm wondering why it's been taking so long to get something done on 42 Emmett. And now it's obviously clear what the man's up to. Thank you.
Esther Huffman, 1000 Haste. Mayor, council, staff, citizens. I just want to ask everybody a question. If you knew that a house next door was a B&B and you were interested in a house next to it, would you buy that house? No. Hands up. If you found out that somebody next to you had a B&B and you were already living there, what would your recourse be, or would you consider selling your home? Hands up.
All the bylaws, first of all.
I think this pretty much says, and it would be interesting to actually poll all of you, but it's probably not legal to ask how you would feel if you would want it to buy a house and if there was a B&B next door. What I don't understand is why, if we have 10 B&Bs, and I'm using B&Bs because these are owner-operated in Pelham, why is the tail wagging the dog? We only have 10. I wonder how many people are here. We know we have several hundred signatures on paper that do not want this in residential neighborhoods. And it boggles the mind that we're actually going through this. We are not Niagara-on-the-Lake. We're not Niagara Falls. We are not Stratford. We're a little town. Yes, we're growing. It's not that our eyes are closed to progress and growth, but there are times when we should say what we value is our neighborhoods, our neighbors, and we don't want to have strangers coming in and out next door. Most of the time, we won't be able to call anybody about any kind of an infraction. You're not going to allow non-owner operated short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, which is great. Allowing them in rural areas like Lindy's, that's fine. In commercial areas. So why can't we do the same with bed and breakfast? No bed and breakfast in residential areas. Where do you live, Barb?
Pardon me?
Where do you live?
Okay.
I don't think we have to answer that. That's not a good question.
Well, that's not a good question,
No.
but it's an important point to
No.
the people who do live here. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Wait, we'll see somebody else.
I just want to get some clarity on the legal question that was brought up by the gentleman, if I may, through you, ma'am. We did during one of our sessions a year ago bring to the town our concern because in the actual the zoning bylaw itself, it is permissive. It does not say anything other than 25% of the property's use being used for commercial, in a sense of a home business of that sort. However, second to that, the secondary plan identified in our area that a bed and breakfast establishment was not permitted. It was not permissive and put in there as being permitted as it was in the urban area. We did approach the town, identified all these points, and the response we got from senior management of the town was there was zero interest in going after them because it would cost them tens of thousands of dollars legally, and they had no interest in doing that. That was what I was told. So in response to you, there was no legal challenge because the town at the time had zero interest in going after that, even though we gave them all the information they required.
First-time speaker yet, and then you've already talked once, but you can come again.
Clarify something that was.
Okay, well, let's this gentleman go first. And again, please state your name, sir.
My name's Kit Lefroy. I live in 4 Woodside Square. We've lived in Fonthill now for 13 years. As a homeowner, I and everybody else here as a homeowner, no matter what bylaw you pass, and hope to God you don't allow these establishments in residential areas, no matter what the bylaw is, I as a homeowner under Canadian common law, and it's unequivocal, have the right to unfettered use of my property in peace. And if that's in any way disturbed on an ongoing basis, I can sue them right out of their socks. Ask a lot of golf clubs what's happened when people have built homes where they shouldn't have built them after the golf course was there. And they have to make some major changes, and it's the same with this situation. So we are covered. It's a messy way of doing it. So, but please go the route of banning in residential areas. So I don't have to sue somebody, but I will if I have to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There was a gentleman's question about principal residences and owner occupied, and in the bylaw 1136.7, 6.8 regarding bed and breakfast establishments, it says the dwelling principal residence means a dwelling unit owned or rented by a person alone or jointly with another person, which is their principal place of residency. In other words, it's not just the owner, it's a renter that can also use it as a B&B.
Thank you. There's a gentleman at the back.
Hi, my name's Stuart Galloway, and I live at 22 Brock Street. We moved into Fonthill from North Pelham 6 years ago, and we live on, it's basically a dead-end street because we back onto the cemetery. Now, the house behind us was occupied by 2 people for the first 3 years we lived there. Another couple had bought it, and they totally renovated it and added 4 units, which they were renting on Airbnb. They got a bit of flack from all the neighbors, and then they took it off Airbnb, but they put it on vacation home rental sites, kind of to hide it. But because they have 4 units, and they're large units, when we first moved there, we could sit out in our backyard, and it was quiet every evening. But now, completely through the summer, if they have 4 units rented, and there's no stipulation on whether it's 2 people, 4 people, or a whole family, like they have 5 patio set up in their backyard around the pool. So it's like a hotel in our backyard now. Now, we didn't want that when we moved in. And the way it's sounding, if they're Airbnb now, are they going to get grandfathered in and there's nothing we can do about it? The other thing is, in the proposed bylaw, it says 3 bedrooms. I mean, 2 would be good for me. But it doesn't stipulate how many people can stay in those bedrooms, does it? Can you have a family of 4 or 6 in a bedroom? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have a large property, but it's like having a party in your backyard every weekend.
Yeah. I will, if I can ask the question of the Director of Planning, anywhere in the bylaw, does it stipulate if we stipulate the rooms, which I believe are 3, did we ever, is there stated in the bylaw or any thought given, any consideration given to the thought of limiting the number of residents at any one time?
I think that has to be.
Mr. Mayor, through you, there isn't anything specifically in these drafts currently. Under the Ontario Building Code and the Ontario Fire Code, when you have an occupancy of greater than 10 or more people, then there's different requirements in terms of exiting and fire and your accesses and your exiting routes and so forth. So that's what, again, part of the thing that we would look at as part of the inspection process. And under the building code, a bedroom is considered to be a 2-person occupancy. And so you would count the number of beds as well as part of our inspection process to see how many people could be occupying that. You'd also look at any couches or that can be pulled out into beds, and those are all factors that you look at in terms of determining the occupancy and then what they need to do to achieve compliance with fire code and building code.
Okay, thank you. Back to the residents. Any further speakers? Yes, sir.
My name is Ernie Hinton. I live in Petronella Parkway in Fonthill. And I'd just like to emphasize that gentleman was up before speaking. He's living in Brock. He lives beside a bed and breakfast at the present time on 16 Brock, I believe the number is. And it backs on to me where I reside on Petronella Parkway. Now, as this lady before said, she moved here to Fonthill, Pelham, 42 years ago. And I'm just a short time behind you. I moved here 39 years ago. When I bought a lot in Petronella Parkway, there was nothing there. And I never dreamed back in 1981 that this was going to come to this, a bed and breakfast. Because the last time I inquired at the previous council, I inquired by my councillor about the bed and breakfast, and I was told because the bylaw was there that a neighbour on my left or my right could open a bed and breakfast anytime he wanted. Well, that's not what I want. I didn't move here 39 years ago. I moved here to be a residential community at that time when it was advertised, and a lot of people are moving here. Seniors are moving, people who's retired moving here, and it's definitely, I don't want this. I don't want it in my neighbourhood because this bed and breakfast at the present time has been operated, and the bed and breakfast is out in the patio, which backs onto my property in Petronella Parkway, and it's noisy. It's noisy. The people are sitting out there, and I tell you, maybe in the winter now, it's inside, too cold to sit outside, but I don't want this in my neighbourhood. I pay high taxes, and to have a bed and breakfast, if I ever decide to move, the value of my property is going to go down. Going to go down. It's not going to go up. And bed and breakfast is going to restrict everybody the values of their homes. Thank you very much for your time.
Any other speakers? Yes, sir.
Mayor Doug Major, Fonthill.
Thank you.
I heard earlier this evening from the Director of Planning that there had been some meetings on October the 1st and that they were very positive meetings with an awful lot of input. And if I could, through you, may I ask the Director of Planning, were there any changes made to the proposals that you had talked about at that point in time based on the input of that meeting?
Mr. Mayor, through you, there have not been any changes made to date. We are taking, that's part of the input that we will consider as well as the input received tonight. So between October 1st and today, when the public meeting was scheduled, there wasn't the opportunity to make changes.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, may
Yes.
perhaps may I thank you then for organizing this public meeting, and I would suggest that you're getting a little bit of a feel, not only from October the 1st meeting, which was very vocal and may in fact result in some proposed changes. But this public meeting is also in the area where you're hearing from the public. One lady put it, the tail's wagging the dog, and I hope that this council is prepared under your direction with input from the Director of Planning to make some of the changes that we feel are very important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I don't public speak either. I also live
Oh,
at
excuse me, could you please state your name for the clerk?
Lisa Galloway, 22 Brock Street.
Thank you.
I'm complaining about that Airbnb as well, and the planner said that there were several successful Airbnbs, and the other Airbnb owner said the retired couple were very successful, to the detriment of whom, and who is evaluating that level of success?
My name is Cheryl Crozier. I live on Canberra Road. In addition to the Airbnbs and short-term rentals, I've been a lifelong resident in Fawn Hill, and I've seen a lot of changes through the years, changes that I don't really like. I like that community feel, and now with the growth in all these new neighborhoods and all the developments, in addition to the Airbnbs and the bread and breakfast, I think we should put a little bit more of a halt on some of this expansion as well, because that's got a lot to do with it, I feel. So that's just my 2 cents.
As the evening goes on, I still have to open this debate up to council, but again, is there any other speakers? Okay, on once, twice, 3 times? Oh. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing so many people to speak tonight, even though they weren't officially on the agenda. Thank you.
On behalf of council, obviously we're very happy with this kind of turnout from residents. This is what this meeting was all about. We heard the proposed bylaws. We heard from the residents on how you feel about that. And this council will be obviously taking everything that was discussed here tonight in consideration going forward. I will now ask council, the committee themselves. Oh, I'm sorry, got to stay official. So that committee, motion put forward by Councillor Hildebrand, that committee receive and recommend the council receive the public written submissions by the following individuals. I won't name them again. And that committee receive and recommend that council receive the verbal submissions made by the public. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion's carried. And you have one more for me, I believe. Oh,
Council input now.
yeah, okay. So I don't have to sign that. So now the part of the evening where we have council input. Is there a councillor that would like to make comments? Councillor Wink.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the residents have been waiting a very long time for a resolution to this issue. When can we as a council expect this to be presented at a council meeting?
You have the
Combination thereof. In fairness, it's hard to answer your question until you're done your debate, because you may well give us any number of instructions of adjust the draft materials to consider A, B, and C. And at this point in time, we're still taking in, well, we took feedback up to about 2 minutes ago. So that whole cognitive thought process we have to go through, and then more drafting. So even if council gave us no further instructions, there's all of this input to think about and try to look to see how that fits. So like months are going to be necessary.
Months?
Well, here we are in mid to late October. You know, tomorrow night is Gypsy Moth. That's also, and then you're doing the budget. So realistically, January would be a very good outcome. If council wishes this to take priority of those items, we can maybe talk December, but that is where we're at.
Yeah, I just want a clear expectation on when we can get this done, and I understand the need to address the budget before the end of the year. Gypsy Moth has to be taken care of because that affects the budget, but I certainly wouldn't want to see this drag on much longer than the beginning of the new year.
Yes.
Yeah. And as you're aware, Councillor, the staff at the planning department has been meeting along with the Cannabis Control Committee on a weekly basis. And that obviously, we had an interim bylaw that ran out as of October 15th. We extended it for 9 months because that has got a large portion of the residents' attention. We obviously had to address that issue and come up with bylaws that will control that industry in the town. So that was one of the reasons why the Airbnb had to get taken back a couple of months, if not 6 months, whatever. We apologize for that, but the interim control bylaw and the challenges it presented to the staff to get these bylaws up and running, that took precedence. So please, you've been a very patient town resident so far, and we're just asking for your patience on this a couple of more months. Any other council? Councilor Trophy.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, this question would be to the Director of Planning. Would Sunset Drive in Fenwick be considered rural or urban? I'm not sure of that area because it's a little tricky.
Mr. Mayor, through you, Sunset Drive is in the urban living area. It's in the urban area of Fenwick.
Any other questions?
Yes, to you, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO. So when we debate this, are we going to, obviously the citizens do not want the short-term rentals in the residential, single residential. Obviously, are we going to rewrite that and put that in now, or are we going to have to debate it and fight to get it in the new bylaws? What I'm asking is, are we going to accept that, or are we going to ask the Director of Planning is to put the no Airbnbs or short-term rentals in the plan as we speak?
There are any number of ways in which we can proceed. This council can have a debate and then choose, issue direction to staff to come back with draft documents that reflect a governance philosophy or approach to land use that favors one side or the other. And that really is a debate you need to, in fact, even if you're 7-0, you kind of need to have that discussion amongst yourselves and then issue that as an instruction to us. Not that we're tone deaf. But understand that what we have drafted here, and I just think this needs to be said to really sort of get where we're at. Staff draft potential documents to fall within a range of reasonable. And we're trying to balance two sets of property rights. This evening, we've only heard one person speak on the one side on what, if it is 20 properties, constitutes minority property rights. That is, we have on the one side the desire of people to have quiet enjoyment of their homes and their properties. And on the other side, the desire of people to still have quiet enjoyment of their properties, but to use them to produce income. Both are, broadly speaking, lawful uses in this country, and we tried to bring you something that addresses both. The question of grandfathering that's come up a couple of times in slightly accusatory fashion, the idea of writing that into a schedule is so that this council can determine and can state, we've thought about grandfathering and we think it should only apply to these things. Because if we're silent on that, that gets determined by a court. And whether we end up absolutely prohibiting everything or allowing everything, there will be a question of, even if you prohibit everything, there'll be a question of grandfathering that could get taken to a court, because someone could still say, well, I started a business while it wasn't prohibited, and now, while it is, am I grandfathered? Right? Like, that's still a question, just like when we talk about there's enforcement, whether you absolutely ban or you absolutely permit, there's still a need for enforcement. So we've tried to bring something that respects both types of property rights, including the minority one, within some sort of, and then what we're going to hear from your debate, and we've heard from the public, and we've heard at our roundtables, will either shift one way or the other. But really, staff shouldn't shift it far, save and except unless this council is going to direct it to say, well, we'd like this to focus more on, in this case, quiet enjoyment, to emphasize that over the economic opportunities. We've brought you something that tries to address both and allow for both, because in the default, presumably, the community would like us to try to respect both types of property rights.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CEO, so when do we start this debate?
I think you're having it right now, I hope.
Okay, so I what I'm asking through you, through the mayor, is that we start with not allowing short-term rentals in residential area. I don't know what. What I'm trying to say is any rentals or short-term or Airbnbs or whatever you want in a residential area. I don't know what the other councilors are feeling, but I think that should be the starting point.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I am going to support Councilor Corr on that as well.
Do you want to state any reasons, or just?
No, he stated them all. We heard them all.
Okay.
You know, since,
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I also support Councilor Corr. I think the residents. My ward have definitely talked to me in multitude, and I know their wishes, and as their councilor, I want to represent their wishes.
Yeah, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would concur with Mr. Corr and the rest of the councilors to limit these type of properties to the downtown area and to the rural areas.
Yeah, I agree as well. There shouldn't be any short-term vacation rentals in residential neighborhoods. But we also have to keep in mind that a bed and breakfast is not the same as a short-term vacation rental, where it's just a house rented out to anyone.
Control here.
Not the same thing.
Hey, please. Okay, we've had, everybody's been excellent so far. We really can't get debating like this, okay, guys? Thank you. I guess if I was to throw my 2 cents in, I've walked this planet for 67 years. My whole philosophy in life is, and because I live out in the country and I don't have neighbors, bang, 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 I really haven't minded any other business. If my neighbor does something, he's a quarter of a mile away, go ahead and do whatever you want. You're probably not going to upset me. And that's how I've lived my whole life. Do what you want, just don't force yourself on me. Of course, because once you move into this closer people, and the houses a lot closer, what your neighbor does it becomes part of your life, part of your day, part of your night. So yes, everyone has rights, everyone has property rights, but at the same time, I would still hope that somewhere along the line here, majority has got to rule. So when I talk about some rights, like I say, majority of a neighborhood, a majority of a town, majority of a country, whatever you want to do, we are a democracy, and if the majority of people, and let's shrink it down back to the town or to a neighborhood, decide that they don't want something in their neighborhood, then I have to agree with that. Yeah, the bed and breakfast, I do agree with Councillor Stewart, they're a different animal, but at the same time, what worries me is enforcement. And if you can't enforce it, then myself, I gotta, and if we can't promise you good enforcement, and then I think we shouldn't take the step to put it in there. So, I guess I agree with what has been stated so far, that, I agree with everyone else, that the vast majority of residents, they've spoken about it. You don't want Airbnbs, and you really don't want the bed and breakfast. You don't want rentals, and I think myself, I've got to respect that from the residents.
If council still wants to continue debating, they'll have to.
Okay. Let's see if there is any more. Any other councillor have anything to say? I know we're getting close to 9 o'clock, and if we wanted to continue this debate, we have to extend curfew. But if we have any other debates, then we will give that back to the clerk. And we will read this once I put my glasses on. Recommendation from Councillor Hahn, that this special committee of the whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. Any other discussion towards this? And if not, all those in favor? Okay. All those opposed? None. This meeting is over. Thank you.
Okay.